May 8, 1945. Dawn over the Rhine meadows near Remagen, Germany. A cold mist clings to the barbed wire of Camp Sinzig, one of the sprawling Rheinwiesenlager, where hundreds of thousands of captured Wehrmacht soldiers now wait under open sky. Among the gray masses of men in threadbare Feldgrau stand small, scattered groups of women, former Nachrichtenhelferinnen, signal auxiliaries of the Luftwaffe and Heer, their once crisp uniforms reduced to rags, their faces hollowed by weeks of marching westward ahead of the Red Army. The air smells of wet earth, coal smoke, and the faint sweetness of American cigarettes drifting from the guard towers. This moment matters because it marks the first systematic encounter between the defeated women of the Third Reich and the victor's idea of captivity. For 6 years, German propaganda had painted the American soldier as a gangster in uniform, a rootless mercenary of Jewish capitalism who would rape, loot, and murder the moment restraint was lifted. The Helferinnen, many barely 20 years old, had been told to expect degradation, starvation, or worse. Instead, on this morning, a young lieutenant from the 104th Infantry Division walks the lanes between the enclosures carrying not a submachine gun, but a cardboard box filled with pencils, cheap writing paper, and small notebooks bound in red cardboard. The contrast is almost unbearable in its quietness. These women had marched singing through Paris in 1940, had typed the orders that sent divisions eastward, had listened night after night to the drone of Allied bombers and told one another that American captivity meant the end of dignity. Yet here, beneath a sky still bruised with smoke from the ruined Reich, an enemy soldier places a pencil in the hand of Obergefreiter Ilse Schmidt, 22 years old, former teleprompter operator at Luftwaffe headquarters in Potsdam, and says only, "Write what you need to write." No guard reads over her shoulder. No political officer demands confessions. The pencil is real wood, the paper unlined and plentiful, the act itself an astonishment. The historical record is precise. Between April and September 1945, the U.S. Army's Prisoner of War Information Branch distributed more than 1.2 million sheets of writing paper and 400,000 pencils to German captives in the western zones. Special Circular 117, issued by Schaeff in May, explicitly authorized camp commanders to permit literary and artistic expression among prisoners, provided it contained no propaganda. In Camp Sinzig alone, the weekly report for 19 May 1945 notes that 312 female POWs requested and received writing materials. By June, the number had risen to 1,847. Surviving notebooks, now preserved in the German Federal Archives at Freiburg and in private collections, contain everything from homesick verses to careful botanical sketches of Rhine meadow flowers. One poem, unsigned but dated 14 May 1945, begins, "Hier schreibe ich frei, und niemand verbietet das Wort." Here I write freely, and no one forbids the word. For many of these women, the pencil became the recurring symbol, small, fragile, yet unbreakable. It was not the chocolate bar or the canned Spam, abundant though those were, but the simple wooden pencil that carried the weight of a new reality, a tool to create rather than destroy. In the hands of a Nachrichtenhelferinnen who had spent years transmitting coordinates for bombing runs, the same fingers now traced the shape of linden leaves or remembered the smell of her mother's kitchen. The pencil, sharpened by a bayonet borrowed from an American guard who smiled while he watched, spoke louder than any lecture on democracy. It said, "Your mind is still yours." The transformation was slow and uneven, yet undeniable. Ilse Schmidt, whose diary was recovered in 1987, wrote on June 22, 1945, "I believed we were the poets of a new Europe. Today I see that poetry needs no permission, and that is what they have given us, permission to be human again." Another auxiliary, Anneliese Müller, later recalled in an oral history recorded for the Deutsches Tagebuch archive, We expected chains and found paper. The shame was not that we were prisoners, the shame was that we had helped build a world where paper was rationed and thought policed. By midsummer, the women's sections of the camps had produced hundreds of handwritten anthologies, fragile booklets stitched with thread pulled from blankets, passed hand to hand beneath the wire. Some verses mourned the dead, others cursed the Führer in language that would have meant death a year earlier, still others simply described the taste of real coffee offered by a GI from Wisconsin. The act of writing became the quiet revolution, every stanza an admission that the Reich had lied not only about the war, but about the nature of freedom itself. In the end, when the camps closed and the women walked homeward through the rubble, many carried those red notebooks wrapped in whatever cloth they possessed. Some burned them in shame, others hid them beneath floorboards, a few dared to publish fragments decades later. Yet the pencil, cheap American wood with a soft lead, remained the quiet witness. It had traveled across an ocean built by factories that never paused, had been handed over without sermon or threat, and in that transfer it carried a truth larger than victory: that a society rich enough to give its enemies the means of self-expression has already won something more enduring than territory. Years later, in quiet German towns where apple trees now grow over the old campsites, elderly women sometimes open drawers and take out a stub of yellow pencil, its eraser long gone, its imprint almost illegible. Venus Velvet No. 2, made in the USA. They turn it in their fingers and remember the morning mist of May 1945, the impossible gift of blank paper, and the first hesitant lines they dared to write when no one stood behind them demanding the correct words. In that small cylinder of wood and graphite lay the seed of a different Germany, one that learned, slowly and painfully, that freedom is not the absence of chains, but the presence of a pencil offered without conditions. Proof that a society rich enough to give its enemies the means of self-expression has already won something more enduring than territory.